Welcome to the Great People Show, your guide to greatness, your GPS to excellence. Here's your host, J.J. White.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Great People Show. I am your host, J.J. White, and in the Great People Studio, but this is like the second time in a row.
You know, I missed 2 days in like
Munsey.
8 months. And it's like I'm never here. Good morning. How are you, JJ?
I'm great, thank you. In all candidness, I just like saying, and back in the Great People Studio. It's just something, you know, I don't have a fake radio voice. Well, I do have one. I don't use it on the show. And I cherish the opportunities to fake it out with my fake radio voice.
That's good. We could do a whole show in our radio voices one day.
I like to impersonate NASCAR races. Sunday. Anyway, well, good morning, everyone. Whether you're listening to us on live radio at 97.7 FM in Richmond, Facebook Live at facebook.com/Great People Show, or on Apple Podcast, hit subscribe when you get there. Thank you for being here and allowing us to be a part of your journey to the greatest version of you. So, James, when you look at just obstacles in your life, because we all have obstacles, we always have things that get in our way. If we don't, we're not doing enough. Which one do you think you run into the most often for you?
I think probably time. I think time is the biggest obstacle in my life, and I'm very blessed to be able to say that because there are people with real obstacles.
How is that an obstacle?
Because there is so much to do. You know, you and I are both very busy people.
Yep.
And between work obligations, family, this crazy radio show, and everything else, we have a million commitments.
Yep.
And I think that in my life, the biggest obstacle to achieving what I want to achieve is that there are simply not enough hours in the day for me to do everything that I'd like to do.
Fair enough.
And like I said, you know, now, and we can talk about this later in the show, when back in November, remember, I spent a week in the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you, when that happened, everything else went out the window as far as obstacles.
That was an obstacle.
And it was a huge obstacle. That's why I'm saying, you know, to be able to say my biggest obstacle is time. I mean, I'm blessed to be able to say that because we both, I'm sure, have a lot of friends with much larger obstacles than that.
Well, it's true. When we went to social media this week and simply asked, what is the greatest obstacle you've ever had to overcome? They were deep.
Yeah.
I mean, they were really intense. In fact, we have a couple people joining us later that's going to expand on some of those intense obstacles that they've ever overcome. And you were probably either thinking it or getting ready to say it. Once you start to see other people's obstacles, you feel like you have it easy.
Oh, totally.
Like almost too easy.
Yep.
Yeah. And in a previous show, we talked a lot about handling adversity. I don't really want the show to go that direction. What I prefer people to get from today's show is literally how we perceive and observe and just see these obstacles that come into our life. I don't even want to get to the point how we overcome it, even though I know that's going to happen. Today is about how we see the obstacle. Obstacles are what you see when you take your eyes off your goals. Quoted from a famous motivational poster that you may have had at your office one day. And those things are like, I didn't realize how old motivational posters are now. They're 25, 30 years old. They even came out with a demotivational poster. I don't know if you've ever seen those or not.
No.
Oh my gosh. I think it's demotivators.com. They're absolutely hilarious. And they make fun of the motivational posters, and unfortunately, a lot of them are correct.
I've got to check those out.
It's depressing. They made a great business off of it. But it's true, isn't it? I mean, many of you probably aren't going to agree with me on this, that anything you consider to be an obstacle is only an obstacle because you decided it to be. But what about my cancer, or the abusive relationship, or the horrible car accident my husband was in? So on that Facebook post Monday, for the first time in 43 weeks of research questions, someone I went to high school with said, "What's your greatest obstacle, JJ?" I've never, ever had anybody ask me to answer my own question, ever. Mm-hmm. It was Seth Callis. Went to high school with Seth. He may be listening to us now. So I really appreciate him challenging me on getting me to think about what my greatest obstacle is. And I usually don't think about these questions when we're on the show for myself. We are so focused on other people here. It's just not something that I tend to internalize a lot. And I think I should. And when I went ahead and answered his question, the greatest obstacle I've had to overcome in my life was growing up with an alcoholic father. And it was something I had to deal with my entire life. Growing up, high school, I don't want to get into all the details, but there's quite a few stories of obstacles there. If anybody listening's ever had to grow up in an alcoholic household, it can get very intense. Now, I'm very thankful that my dad was not an abusive parent physically, but it was very verbal. And that's probably one of the reasons why I'm doing the show, James. Is because of all those obstacles that placed in my life, and being here for our listeners, knowing there's someone out there dealing with some of these same issues, that I could somehow be a tool in their life to be a blessing for them, to get them to see that it doesn't have to be an obstacle. It really doesn't have to be an obstacle. And it has formed who I am today on multiple levels. Being a dad, being here on the show, being in the career that I'm in with Dale Carnegie, is to realize that it doesn't have to. You don't have to be defined by these things and by these obstacles. You just don't have to be defined by them. And there were many moments where I just succumbed to the obstacle. I gave into the obstacle. I actually became the obstacle. I was sitting down with my mentor years ago, and he was really unpacking this for me. Sam Hayes, one of the greatest men I've ever had the privilege to know, and thank God he's in my life to help me and guide me. He just simply said, "You've worked so hard to not be your dad. You have become your dad." And it was like, I've become the obstacle. And a lot of people put that on Facebook, that their biggest obstacle is themselves.
Yeah.
So again, thank God this was about 12 years ago, and I've had to really work hard to overcome that. And we've talked about adversity on the show before, and how it's necessary to grow. It's necessary to change, to accomplish your goals. Nothing worth doing or having is easy. Nothing. But we really need to have a conversation about obstacles, specifically how we see them. And obstacles defined as a thing that blocks one's way or prevents or hinders progress. Well, what if it's designed to force you to find a better path? James, am I being insensitive by saying obstacles aren't really what we think they are? Is that insensitive?
I don't think it's insensitive. I don't know if I completely agree. I mean, we have obstacles in our life. We absolutely all have obstacles that we put up for ourselves, and we have obstacles that sometimes people use as a crutch and an excuse, but sometimes you end up in the hospital for a week, unexpectedly. Sometimes, it's something much more serious, and whether it's cancer, whether it's the unexpected death of a very close loved one, whether it's a company that you've been working for 2 or 3 decades and dedicated your whole career to, that all of a sudden goes out of business or lays you off. There are a lot of obstacles we hit, and I think the biggest thing that we can do is respond to those obstacles appropriately.
And I really believe that's what today's show is about.
Absolutely.
You can't completely ignore them, and you also can't let them completely define who you are. When we come back, we're gonna continue to unpack how we handle obstacles in our life. If you have some advice for us and our listeners, or maybe want to share something that you've been able to overcome in your life, you can call to be a part of the show, 804-454-1366. You're listening to The Great People Show. So we're here on The Great People Show talking about obstacles in your life. And I made perhaps a startling statement earlier that sometimes they're not really obstacles. It's just how you perceive them. And not one size fits all in this subject, I understand. But oftentimes when we see things, we just get paralyzed by them. Like it just freezes us up. Yep. And we all react differently emotionally. Sometimes we react physically to these obstacles. I'm going to go through 6 things that we can do differently over the course of the show. How to see obstacles different. As long as James doesn't die in the studio.
I'm okay.
I just need you to live for about 30 more minutes. 40 max. So the first one we're going to talk about is a mere detour to your final goal. I think the biggest thing that obstacles do to us, well, Well, let me finish that sentence. The biggest thing that obstacles do to us is blind us. Okay. Now, I want to make a statement about what I just said, that we don't look at things typically as far as what they do for us. We look at things at what they do to us. And as a coach and a manager and a parent, that's probably the number one thing you can do for people is look at them and say, this is not happening to you. This is happening for you. And I need to help you see that we see things the wrong way. And we see obstacles, whether it be as something as tragic as someone dies in our life or something happens to us with cancer, that we can easily, in fact, we're almost supposed to see that as something that happens to us.
All right, so break that down a little more. Explain to me the difference.
So when something happens, both of these are internal reactions. Okay. It's how they go down in front of us, and then we internalize it. If let's say, for instance, our listeners right there, or out there right now, if you have a job and you're working for a company and it's not your company, if they came to you today and said, we're selling the company, the vast majority of the people in that room, including you probably, will say, I can't believe this is happening to me.
Yes.
Your mind is going to believe that everyone's going to lose their job, including you. Something's bad's going to happen. You're going to lose some benefits. You're going to have to relocate, which means you probably won't, which means you'll probably lose your job, blah, 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 blah. I mean, your mind will go into the lowest common denominator of pain because your brain is designed to do that. It's that protectionism. It's that survivalism that goes on. A very small fraction will say, oh, there could be some really big opportunities with this. Maybe my boss will get fired and then I get his job, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they'll finally put some resources into this place, and I'll be able to do what I've always wanted to be done. So the first scenario is something that's happened to you. The second scenario is something that's happened for you. And we can always find evidence that things are happening to us.
Yep.
Especially if it's not within our control. If it's out of our control, completely out of our control, then we easily go into this is happening to me and not for me modality. And we know through psychology, through everything out there, that if you put something into motion in your mind that this is for you, you have a greater chance of something being for you, period. If you start to say, in fact, I think I may have had a quote. Well, I'm not going to find it fast enough, but if we decide something's going to be bad, if we decide something's going to be an obstacle, you're guaranteed that it's going to be. You're absolutely guaranteed it's going to be. So back to this whole point is this is a mere detour to your final goal. So if you look at it as a complete barrier, a complete obstacle, then you're going to think, I'm not going to get what I want to get. My life is not going to turn out the way that I want it to turn out. We're going to hear from one of our callers later where she lost her husband. And you can absolutely imagine. And when I say, he died, he passed away. And you can imagine how that completely changes everything in your life. And you feel like everything that was supposed to happen is never going to happen. But that's not the way it is, folks. That's just not the way it is. It is a mere detour to where you're supposed to be and what your final goal is. What do you think?
I agree. I think that, losing your spouse, that should not define. I've never been there. I can't possibly pretend to empathize with that, but I've said to my wife before, we talk about this from time to time, and I say, God forbid something happened to me. You can't let that define the rest of your life. Right. You have got to move on, live on, and it's a morbid conversation, but I want her to know that I would never want her to spend the rest of her life mourning or using that as, like I said, to define her future.
Maybe it could define her life, but not in the way that it'll probably naturally define, right? The natural definition is living in sorrow and not being able to do things, blah, blah, blah. Yep. The new definition, right? It's the detour. Oh, so there's just a new path here for me.
Exactly.
And I have to look at it that way.
Exactly. I mean, some of the best things that have ever happened to me have happened because of, at the time, seemingly disastrous obstacles. The biggest one that comes to mind, JJ, is the recession.
Oh, yeah.
So I was working in mergers and acquisitions. The recession happened. That whole industry, like so many others, just dried up. Long story short, ended up doing a startup of all things that took me for about 3 years all over the world. For life experiences that I will never forget.
And you never would have done that on your own if it were to be the recession. You would have just kept doing what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Because it was okay.
And we went through, don't get me wrong, we went through about 1 year that, we were trying to figure out at times how we're going to pay our next mortgage payment. But I tell you what, it led to some experiences that I'll keep with me the rest of my life and led to where things are now.
I collected a lot of quotes for today's show. Here's the first one. There's good in everything if only we look for it, from Laura Wilder. This actually takes us into the second point. So the first point is that the way we see obstacles, we should see them as a mere detour to your final goal. The second is it transforms the plan, not the outcome.
Yeah.
And we've already, these two are very mixed in together. The biggest challenge I see with people is most people don't even have an existing plan when the obstacle comes.
Right.
So you have nothing to rely on other than your emotions. And that's the absolute worst time to rely on your emotions, is in the pit of despair. When that obstacle is staring you in the eye, that's the last time you should really, or the worst time that you should be really depending on those emotions, because you're irrational. You don't have a clear mind at that point. So, I'm a huge advocator of planning. I've never been much of a planner naturally. I have to work really hard at it. We could spend a whole show just me talking about my system, which is a hodgepodge of so many things. But it's a part of having that life plan too.
Yeah.
And if your plan is non-existent, then this one doesn't even apply to you, because you don't even have an old plan that this transforms. You have to have a plan that this transforms so that you can start quickly looking at the new plan. Because I've lost a parent, I've lost grandparents. I saw a list of the 100 most stressful things that you can ever go through. Number 1 is loss of a child. Number 2 is loss of a spouse. And number 3 is loss of a parent. And I don't remember the other 97, but those alone are very powerful.
Yeah.
So, when these things happen, you have a major opportunity to really recalibrate yourself and say, okay, can't control this. I can control the outcome of this, though. I can control how this affects me. And we have to keep our eyes focused on what that outcome needs to be. And we know we're going to get through it. Anything that you've been through that has caused you stress, has caused you turmoil, has caused just what you feel is almost the destruction of you. Maybe you've been in a position in your life where you've almost died from something. We're going to hear from a caller later where he's been told consecutively that he's supposed to die from cancer, and he hasn't, right? That at some point you say, screw that. I'm not succumbing to that. That's not the plan that I'm going to accept. So what do you do?
Exactly. And that's the thing. Everybody's idea of obstacles is very different. The biggest obstacle in your life, may be that you're having trouble with your car, or your biggest obstacle, or the biggest obstacle in your life may be that you're confronted with a potentially terminal illness. Yeah. And it's all relative. Yeah. And our perspective is generally based off of the worst obstacle that we're facing at any given time. And
great point. Great point. We should just end the show on that note, James. That just defined the whole show.
Well, it's just being aware. It doesn't really change anything. It's just something that it's tough to be aware of, and that's one thing. And, you saw it that day that you spent with me. In the fire department, my gosh, we're exposed to people every day with obstacles that, generally speaking, make ours look like nothing. Yeah. And it helps with perspective. And so what role does perspective play in obstacles? Can that help us?
And you also see the side of society where you I know you wonder, you go, really? You called 911 over this? This is an obstacle for you today? Seriously?
Yeah.
But to them in the moment it was, James. That's tough that's tough for us to deal with other people. We have those people in our life.
Yes. All the time. We do. We have, you've met people that break down over seemingly nothing. And
I'm hoping one day my son listens to the show and he laughs at me and says, I can't believe you talked about me when I was 8 years old on the radio. But this morning he woke up crying because yesterday afternoon we were playing soccer in the snow. He woke up crying because he knew he wasn't going to get to play soccer in the snow anymore because it's getting warm outside now. To him in that moment this morning, that was the biggest obstacle in little Ike's life.
wow.
And it was all I can do to say, boy,
Yeah.
pull out the dad card. But I had to sympathize with him, right?
Sure.
I mean, because he's my son, he's 8. I wish I had a life where the only thing I had to worry about was playing with the soccer ball in the snow.
But one time you did.
I guess. But perspective is absolutely everything. Today we're not talking about overcoming obstacles. I don't want to talk about overcoming obstacles. I want to talk how we perceive the obstacle, because I think if we look at it differently, especially when we train ourselves to look at these things differently early in the process, we won't have to work so hard for the rest of our life trying to overcome obstacles. We've got 3 more bullets to go through in our process on how to see them differently. We've got a couple callers coming in. If you want to be a part of the show, you can call us at 804-454-1366, because we want to hear stories of how people have looked at their obstacles differently. And if you look at them differently, the outcomes will change. So don't go away, folks. You're listening to The Great People Show. Welcome back to The Great People Show, everyone. Today we're talking about overcoming obstacles, and we're not talking about overcoming obstacles.
I thought we weren't talking about that.
Gosh,
JJ.
and we're on live radio. I can't rewind, guys. We're talking about how we see obstacles, and that can make overcoming the obstacles a little easier to manage. And we have on the phone with us a good friend and a guy that's going to talk about some obstacles, Bill Mitchell. Bill, welcome to The Great People Show.
Hey, Bill.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Great to hear your voice, JJ.
Same here. So, Bill, tell us about probably the greatest obstacle that you've had to overcome in your life in this thing called cancer.
Well, it came completely unexpected. I was just going for a checkup that I had to have to compete in a triathlon. Mm-hmm. And they'd done some blood work in advance, and they found out that I had cancer. It was just a complete surprise and a shock. I can remember like it was yesterday when the Dr. Aziz looked at me and she said, you need to sit down. And I said, I'm in a hurry. I've got to go. She said, this is serious.
Wow.
And I said, I've got a flight to catch at 1 o'clock. She looked at me and said, not anymore, you don't. You've got an appointment with a specialist today.
Wow.
And my whole world changed that day. In a lot of ways, and I see it as a gift.
And why is that? Why do you see it as a gift?
I have probably lived more and I had a charmed life. Don't misunderstand. I didn't have a bucket list. You know, when I found out about it, I didn't need to make a bucket list. I'd already done just about everything anybody could want to do. I've traveled the world and seen and done. But I get up and get more out of every day of my life. When you're told that you've got go home, get your house and your affairs in order, you've got 6 months to live, it changes everything.
So you had 6 months to live according to the doctor, but how many years ago was that?
That was on May, that would have been about May the 10th of 2007.
Wow. So 11 years ago you had 6 months to live.
Right.
Sounds like
I still have the cancer.
Okay. And how long did it take you to see that obstacle differently? I presume it wasn't in the doctor's office that you thought it was a gift when you first found it.
No, it wasn't. I mean, it was like anybody else, the big C word, you know, it's, oh my gosh, you know, and I had the good fortune, though, however, of having a father who raised me. I'm a man of faith, and so I woke up every morning watching him, you know, read his Bible, and so I was raised with a lot of good, solid principles and foundations. And one of the things that he had taught me is every obstacle can become an opportunity, and that what happens to us does not define us, but how we react to it. And he had drilled those mantras into my life, and so I think that helped, but it took a while for me to kind of come to grips with it. Of course, you know, initially you're trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? What is the treatment going to look like? And it just becomes this whirlwind of doctor's appointments and tests and all of those kinds of things. And so it's when you finally get alone in the quiet stillness and the reality sets in, one of the things that I had learned from my dad that I think helped me see this as an opportunity instead of an obstacle early on was he said, never take anything that is not within your control personal when it happens to you. And I dealt with a lot of people, and I think that's one of the mistakes that we make is when obstacles come in our life, we take it personal.
Sure.
Like, why me?
Yep.
And it's that me. And I think that's one of the things that helped me in the early days was that. And I thought I was doing pretty good. And one day my wife looked at me after it had been a couple of years. And, when you're told you've only got a short time to live, you don't buy green bananas and you don't take post-dated checks, right?
Oh, my gosh.
And so
good point.
My wife told me, she said one day, and I was just talking about having me buy something, and I had gotten in the habit of kind of joking to deal with the reality of my illness, and I said something like, well, I won't even live long enough to enjoy that or something of that nature. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she said, when are you going to stop living like you're dying?
Wow.
And start living like you're going to live again?
Wow. What'd that do to you?
Oh, it was a wake-up call, and it was a difficult process because I'd gone through, I got rid of everything, gave everything away. And by the way, if you ever think you're dying and give all your stuff away and then you live, don't expect to get it back. But I had given all my stuff away, and I had gone through that whole process, and I have one pair of brown shoes to this day, and I have one pair of black shoes, and I have a pair of running shoes and a pair of hiking shoes, and that's it. And when my running shoes wear out, I get rid of them, get a new pair, and I gave it because and it's not because I like a minimalist lifestyle. It's just you go through that. Why accumulate things? Nobody's going to want them when I die anyway.
Yeah.
And so it was a major shift for me to begin to really look at this as an opportunity. I've been given an opportunity to come face to face that is something that's a reality for all of us, and that is that nobody gets out of this world alive.
Yeah.
And the difference between those of us who've been diagnosed terminal and come to grips with that is if we'll allow it, it'll cause us to appreciate and savor every single moment. And that's why I say it's a gift. I've got to witness the birth of 6, soon to be 7 grandchildren.
Wow.
I've had the pleasure of watching my kids graduate from high school that I didn't think I'd get a chance to see. I've had the pleasure of watching them get married. I didn't think I'd have that opportunity to walk them down the aisle. So all of those things that I really didn't think I'd see, I've been able to see. And I think I've savored those a little deeper. And the other thing I think about the obstacle, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, is I don't wake up every morning and say, oh, man, I've got cancer. I wake up every morning and say, thank God I'm alive.
Yeah.
And I get up and I go for my run, and I have things that I do every day to fight the cancer and but to battle it. But I refuse. I just absolutely refuse to take it personal and say, why me? And I don't know how much time you want me to take, but let me tell you a real quick story. I was in the hospital having my treatments, getting treatments done. And, you're in and out and everything. And so I was actually out in California at a place, and I was waiting on my doctor appointment, and the room is completely full of people with cancer. And I look around, and at that time, almost everyone in the room was old enough to be my parents.
Wow.
And there was I'm sitting, and I happen to be sitting in a little play area for children because there was just no room. And I'm sitting in a little chair, with a little table where there's toys and blocks. And the elevator opened into the room, and a lady stepped off, and she was a beautiful woman, looked like she walked off the cover of a magazine. And in her hand was the hand of her 4-year-old daughter, who had a bandana around her head. Her eyes were sunken and dark. And the mother walked over to me and she said, sir, can my daughter play with you while I go meet with the doctor real quick? And so the little girl sat out, and I played blocks with her and everything. And she said, my doctor said, Mommy said, if the doctor said my numbers are good, I can have ice cream today. And so I sat there and talked with the little girl, and she was so positive and upbeat. And the mom walked out, and the girl looked up at her mom, and her mom just kind of shook her head, and the little girl said, "No ice cream?" And the mom said, "No." She said, "That's okay, maybe next time," and jumped up and said, "Bye, mister," and walked away. And I asked God to forgive me. I said, "God, forgive me," because just as I was looking around that room, everybody's old enough to be my parent. I was getting ready to say, "Why me?" Mm-hmm. And that's when the elevator door opened. Mm. And, you know, I've just learned in life that, especially over the last 11 or so years, that, you know, it's not what happens to us. It really is.
Yeah. Bill, thank you.
It's what we do.
Thank you so much for being on the show. What a powerful story. Not just your story, but the story of that little girl that you shared with us, because I think we get so sucked in to our own life that we forget that there's people around us that are fighting a battle 10 times greater than us. And thank God for all the decades you've had of life, because that little girl probably won't have that. And,
absolutely.
And I want to thank you for coming on the show and opening yourself up and being such a huge blessing to the rest of our group.
No, thank you.
Thanks,
thank you
Bill.
so much for having me. Thank you. You take care.
Enjoy your day. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Wow.
That's one of the best calls we've ever had.
Oh my gosh.
That's
I mean, that starts to really, that's what life is all about right there.
Yeah.
Is getting so far outside of yourself. And it took him getting cancer on his knees, literally, probably with that little girl, to value every moment in his life. Mm-hmm. I wish we don't have to go through that. I pray that no one has to go through that. But what a major blessing it is to see life that way, that the rest of us will never see life that way.
Yeah, and to just try to put yourself in that position and think about how I would have dealt with it, how you would have dealt with it, etc.
So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, take some more callers. You're listening to The Great People Show. We've talked to Asher. He's going to let us go 2 hours on the air this morning.
That's good.
Because of the response to the show. Thanks, Asher. We appreciate you. We have on the phone with us a good friend of the show, Maribeth. Maribeth, welcome to the program.
Thank you, JJ.
So today we're talking about obstacles, and you had commented on our Facebook post about the loss of your husband was a major obstacle. Tell us how you reacted and saw that in your life at the moment, and how that's changed over time for you.
Well, first off, it's very humbling to reveal, this very personal part of myself.
Thank you.
Publicly. And how I dealt with that, I'd like to say that it was with grace and dignity, but, seriously, that's a lie.
Okay.
It was with, paralyzing fear, confusion, denial, anger, sadness, and Jason, my heart. I've tried to explain it to other people. Your heart hurts. It's like a physical pain in your heart when you go through something like this. I've really never had that experience since then, and I never had it before that either. Anyway, my heart was also really breaking for my son, who was a junior in high school at that time. Yeah. So it was just very, he was filled with rage and anger, and he was really mad at God, and that was just really breaking my heart. But I've had a little time to reflect on this since our conversation yesterday afternoon, and so I did have two things that I felt helped me get
share those with us.
Or through this, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, so I don't know if you have additional questions or if you just want me to go into.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Okay, well, of course you have family, you have friends, and people envelop you in their love and support and in that confusing state. But I had a friend who brought a book to me. And that book is called A Time to Grieve. And JJ, it's a daily meditation, a book on healing through grief. And, at first I thought, oh, whatever. I couldn't even hardly focus on reading.
Right.
And it really, I think it was like 365 days worth of readings. And it took me longer than that to get through it. But it really, the days that I would be inspired to pick it up and read a page, it was really following my personal grief process. Yeah. And it just really helped me through that. And the second thing that I did early on, and that I've continued today, is on the 1 month anniversary of James's death, I started journaling, and I was writing to him. And I was just writing about our day, you know, what my son and I did, or, you know, about work. I was writing about my grief, you know, wrote about our love, you know, and how I feel as though it helped me have a continued connection with him.
And do you feel like that that journaling also helped you to reframe the actual obstacle that you were in, that it really wasn't something that you should keep inside of you? You should just kind of let that out, and that helped you realize that, hey, I can move on with my life.
Yes, it really became a lifeline with him, but then it also became an opportunity for me to see what was going on inside of me, and then put that down in words and let it out. Instead of keeping everything pent up, I was letting it out. Now, maybe it was between me and my higher power, but at least I was not keeping things stuffed inside of me.
So, Maribeth, one thing I'd appreciate you sharing with our audience was the story you told me about how you kept the activities with your son going that your husband did on the golfing. And I think that's a powerful example of how we can see obstacles, and especially the people around us that are also part of those obstacles.
Yes. You know, as I shared with you, you know, all those firsts that you go through when you've experienced a death like that, you know, almost like driving into the driveway the next day and knowing they're not going to be there. You know, so you have to face it every day. But Father's Day was quickly approaching, and it was like, oh my gosh, you know, Zach's going to, you know, my son's name is Zach, and I thought it's going to be a terrible experience for him going through his first Father's Day without his dad. And I thought, wait a minute, I lost my dad. You know, so my father was also deceased. And so what we did is we decided to make, or I did, and hopefully, you know, gratefully he went along with me. But we decided to celebrate our dads on Father's Day versus being really sad about it. And my husband was a big golfer, and my dad was a big golfer. Yep. So my son and I started a tradition of playing golf. Not that I'm a great golfer, but it was such fun, and it was joyful, and it was a celebration instead of a day of sadness.
Well, I think we heard that with our previous caller, Bill, and you're saying the same thing, that if you can turn these obstacles actually into a celebration of life, it completely transforms the way that we see the obstacle. Maribeth, thank you so much for joining the show. What a great inspiration this has been to our audience. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
All right, thank you. You too.
All right.
Bye.
You know what? One thing I picked up from what Maribeth was saying is that, and Bill said this too, that the obstacle can be very selfish, and we have to find a way to get the obstacle out of us.
Yeah.
With Bill, it was his wife. Quit feeling so sorry for yourself. Start living instead of start feeling like you're always going to die. With Maribeth, it's like, this isn't about me. This is more about my son, and I can move on from this. You know, the journaling, the celebrating things rather than mourning things. I think that's probably the hardest part of it too, is to get it out of ourselves. We love it in ourselves.
Absolutely. And sometimes even, and I'm not saying in either of these two callers today, I'm just more in general, sometimes people sort of like being able to wallow in these obstacles. You know, it's like a guilty pleasure almost. I don't know how to describe it. You know, I think we've all been there. I
think the fourth bullet on our list of how to see obstacles explains that, is don't be a victim.
Yes.
Don't blame others, because you can easily say, woe is me, this is happening to me, why me? I think Bill, to quote Bill, he said, me, right? Yep. And the opportunity here that everyone has with an obstacle is to say, how do I manipulate the obstacle? How do I turn it around? I picked up a couple quotes. One is, the obstacle is the path, Zen proverb. But Marcus Aurelius, what stands in the way becomes the way. Like, if you think of Bill with his cancer, or Maribeth with her husband passing away, that is the way. You can't run from it. That is the way. I have to jump on its back and ride it in the direction it's going, and then I have to ditch it.
Right.
We have time for one more quick caller. We have Will on the line. Will, welcome back to the Great People Show.
Hey, good morning, JJ.
Hey, buddy, how are you?
How you guys doing?
Good. What's up?
Man, very good. Hey, just really enjoyed the first couple of callers and thought I'd call and chime in on this one.
Do it.
Sure. So lost my mother, lost a job, and lost a girlfriend all in 12 months.
And how did you see all those obstacles? How did you turn that around?
You know, man, it was funny. I didn't actually answer your question initially because I just don't view life that way. For me, it's more just that perspective. Like, to me, I just look at, life is not a problem to be solved. It's an adventure to be lived.
What a great point.
And those things were certainly tough at the time, but I really, what Bill said really resonated with me in terms of seeing, the big challenge he faced as really a gift. And all those things for me, just seeing, again, I think it's up to the person, but you have to really develop a different question set. You've been saying a lot on the show, like, why me, but, who, what, what was me, that stuff. Instead of that, why not me,
Wow, great point.
Just looking at it differently and saying, all right, I don't ask those questions anymore. Anytime things happen, just recognizing that all I have comes from him and it's all for him. So, both the good and the bad. It's right out of the book of Philippians for anybody wants to go dig in there some more. But, instead now when things happen, I just really look at, like the question I asked, it was, what are you up to here, God? Like, what are you trying to teach me, and what can I learn from this, and how can I grow?
And I think another part of that question, which is just a way to reword what you just said, is what am I not seeing that I should see? What am I missing in this? Because if you just get so self-centered and wrapped up in your emotions in a negative way, you're probably missing a ton.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Well, thanks so much for calling us, brother. It's always good to hear from you. What great
Likewise,
words. You're quotable, man. We're going to have to take like 3 of those and quote them on the internet. That's awesome.
Feel free. Thanks.
Good job, brother.
Appreciate your time.
Enjoy your day.
Have a great day. Thanks.
So we have two more bullets left on this whole point.
Yep.
And these aren't in any particular order. I'll review them because we've been talking about this for almost an hour. How you should see obstacles. A mere detour to your final goal.
Right.
Number 2, it transforms the plan, not the outcome. Number 3, focus on what you can control. We heard a lot of that from Bill. Number 4, don't be a victim. Don't blame others. The 5th one is step back. And actually, we just heard that from Will. It's like his immediate step back clause is, okay, what am I supposed to get from this? Not why is it hurting me? What am I supposed to get from this?
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think the other thing that step back can mean is try not to have an emotional response. Step back, take a minute, take a deep breath. It's kind of like in life when there's something really angry about and we go and we write that angry email. Write it out. Don't click send.
James, it feels so good.
It feels good to write it. Write it. Leave it for an hour. Come back an hour later, and if you still want to send that email, then click send. But I guarantee you 99% of the time, you won't click send.
So is there an element of this, whether it be the Bills of the world, the Maribeths of the world, the Wills of the world, that we can't forget these things because we do have to revisit it and say, wow, I can't believe I was so upset and so wound up. I can understand why I was, but I don't really remember that person anymore. Because I think some people try to bury it, but they really don't.
Sure.
They don't ever address the real emotions that we had towards something, and then they end up coming out on something else. So you might have felt like you overcame an obstacle at one point, but what really happened was you just delayed it.
Absolutely. And it's like, Bill, talking about when he was in that doctor office and was sat down and was told this for the first time. And, now, that all seems, that's a distant memory, and his emotions of that day were completely different to what he felt just a couple weeks later.
Yep.
It takes time.
It does. And we heard this with Maribeth. You have to let the other people around you support you through that. We heard it with Bill with his wife.
Yep.
Oftentimes these obstacles, we feel like we can do it all on our own. We can overcome it all by ourselves. And that's definitely not true. Something else that I jotted down whenever I was prepping for the show was a quote from BC Forbes. History has demonstrated that the most notable winners usually encountered heartbreaking obstacles before they triumphed. They won because they refused to become discouraged by their defeats. So I'm going to encourage our audience. Obstacles only have power over us if we leave them in the dark, unexamined and unchallenged. By bringing them into the light, giving them a name, and facing them, they lose the power to control us. Quote from Marquita Harold. Folks, don't let these obstacles control you. You control them. I remember weightlifting years ago. My coach told me, he said, either you move that weight or that weight moves you.
Amen. Which, with 30 seconds left, takes us to our last bullet. Keep moving. Go on the offensive.
Keep moving, folks. Don't let it get you down. Outrun it. Outpace it. That's what life is all about.
That's right.
James, thanks for being here this morning.
Hey, thanks for being here
Listeners,
yourself.
thank you for being a part of our show. Tune us back in next week. 97.7 FM, Apple Podcasts. We are your guides to greatness. Thanks, folks.
See ya.
Oh, I want something just like this. Where'd you wanna go?
Thanks for joining us. Tune in to The Great People Show again next week, Thursdays, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Some superhero, some very